Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases of medical atrocity ever recorded in the history of Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1848, something statistically impossible was happening in the dissection rooms of the Savannah Medical Academy. The numbers told a story that no one wanted to read. Between March and September of that year, the Academy processed 47 cadavres listed in acquisition ledgers as Negro specimens for anatomical instruction. This represented a mortality rate 5 times higher than the entire enslaved population of the 3 counties that supplied bodies to the institution. Yet no one questioned the mathematics. No one asked where all these bodies were coming from. And no one investigated the sounds that began emanating from the Academy's basement in the humid darkness of August nights. Savannah in 1848 stood at the forefront of Southern medical education. The city, with its grid of elegant squares and moss-draped thoroughfares, housed 3 institutions dedicated to training physicians for the expanding plantation economy. The Savannah Medical Academy, established in 1838, occupied a 4-story brick building on Reynolds Square. Its marble-columned facade projected respectability and scientific progress. Inside, according to the Academy's charter preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives, students received instruction in anatomy, surgery, materia medica, and the treatment of diseases particular to the Negro constitution, a phrase that appeared frequently in medical literature of the period. Dr. Ambrose Thorne had joined the faculty in 1843 after completing his medical training at the University of Pennsylvania. According to biographical records compiled by the Medical Association of Georgia in their 1851 membership directory, Thorne was 38 years old in 1848, unmarried, and resided in rooms adjacent to the Academy building. His specialty was surgical anatomy, and his reputation within Savannah's medical community rested on his ability to secure an unusually consistent supply of fresh specimens for dissection. While other medical schools struggled with the chronic shortage of cadavers that plagued anatomical instruction throughout the South, Thorne's students benefited from what he termed in his published lectures reliable access to subjects suitable for detailed study. The mechanics of this supply chain were, officially at least, straightforward. According to Georgia law and standard practice throughout the antebellum South, the bodies of enslaved people who died without claim could be transferred to medical institutions for educational purposes. Plantation owners occasionally donated the bodies of workers who had died from disease or accident. County authorities made available those who died in custody. The arrangement was considered mutually beneficial. Medical students received essential training, and bodies that would otherwise be buried in unmarked graves served, as one medical journal phrased it, a final purpose in advancing the healing arts. What made Dr. Thorne's supply particularly remarkable was its consistency and condition. While other anatomists complained about receiving bodies in advanced stages of decomposition, rendering detailed study impossible, Thorne's specimens arrived fresh, sometimes still warm according to notations in dissection logs. Former students who later corresponded about their training praised the exceptional quality of the cadavers they worked with at the Academy. One such letter, preserved in the papers of Dr. Marcus Whitley and donated to the Georgia Historical Society in 1892, noted that Professor Thorne somehow always had subjects so recently deceased that the preservation of tissue allowed for the most intricate anatomical demonstrations. Among Thorne's students in 1848 was Jonathan Pierce, a young man of 24 from a prominent Augusta family. Pierce had entered the Medical Academy in 1846 after completing preparatory studies at Franklin College in Athens. According to Academy records, he quickly distinguished himself as Thorne's most capable student, demonstrating both technical skill and what Thorne described in evaluation reports as commendable dedication to the advancement of surgical knowledge. By early 1848, Pierce had been elevated to the position of surgical apprentice, assisting Thorne directly in dissection demonstrations and maintaining the anatomical specimens used for instruction. The relationship between mentor and apprentice appeared exemplary. Letters from Jonathan to his father, William Pierce, a lawyer in Augusta, expressed gratitude for the opportunity to study under such a distinguished anatomist. In a letter dated January 15, 1848, Jonathan wrote, "Dr. Thorne has taken particular interest in my education, granting me access to his private library and allowing me to assist in procedures beyond what is typical for students at my level of training. I am learning more in these months than I could in years of conventional study. What Jonathan did not mention in his letters home, and what would only become clear much later, was that his education included access to areas of the academy that other students never entered. Chief among these was the basement storage facility where specimens were prepared before being brought to the main dissection theater. According to the academy's architectural plans, filed with the city of Savannah in 1838 and preserved in municipal archives, the basement consisted of a single large room used for storage of anatomical materials and chemicals used in preservation. The plans made no mention of additional spaces beyond this main chamber. The first indication that something unusual was occurring at the academy came not from within the institution itself, but from neighbors on Reynolds Square. Catherine Merriweather, whose family owned a townhouse adjacent to the academy, noted in her diary an entry dated August 8, 1848, that has since become key to understanding what transpired that summer. Awakened past midnight by sounds from the medical building next door, she wrote. Not the usual noises one expects from such a place, but something more distressing. What I can only describe as moaning, muffled but distinctly human, as if someone were in great pain but unable to cry out freely. It continued for perhaps half an hour before silence returned. I mentioned it to Mother this morning, who suggested I had been dreaming, but I am quite certain I was fully awake. Similar reports began accumulating through August. A night watchman who patrolled Reynolds Square told the constable that he had observed lights in the academy basement windows at hours when the building should have been locked and dark. When questioned, Dr. Thorne explained that he often worked late preparing specimens for the following day's demonstrations and that the sounds, if any, were likely the settling of the old building or perhaps stray cats that sometimes found their way into the basement through ventilation grates. The explanation satisfied authorities, but it did not satisfy Jonathan Pierce. According to testimony he would later provide, recorded in documents that surfaced decades after the events, he had begun noticing discrepancies in the anatomical ledgers he was responsible for maintaining. The ledgers tracked each body received, date of arrival, approximate age and sex of the deceased, condition of the cadaver, and the procedures performed upon it. What troubled Jonathan was that several entries recorded specimens as arriving in what he termed suspiciously fresh condition, with notation that immediate dissection was required due to the risk of rapid decomposition in the summer heat. On the night of August 12, Jonathan Pierce discovered something in the basement that shattered his understanding of his mentor's work. He had remained at the academy late, working on anatomical drawings in the dissection theater, when he heard sounds from below. Following them down the basement stairs with a lamp in hand, he found Dr. Thorne in the storage room, standing beside a body laid out on a preparation table. What made Jonathan pause was not the presence of the body itself, but the fact that the chest was moving, rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. The confrontation that followed would be described years later in Jonathan's own words, written in a journal he kept hidden for decades. When I asked what manner of preservation technique could cause a cadaver to appear to breathe, Thorne turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. There was no shame in his face, no recognition that anything improper had occurred. He simply said, "This specimen will serve our students well once properly prepared." The plantation owner assured me she would not survive the night in any case. "We are not causing suffering that would not occur regardless. We are simply ensuring that her death serves a greater purpose than rotting in the ground." It was only then, according to Jonathan's account, that he understood the true nature of his mentor's supply chain. The bodies were not always corpses when they arrived at the academy. Some came in the final stages of illness, still clinging to life but deemed by their owners as good as dead. Others were described by plantation owners as having suffered fatal accidents, though they remained conscious, their injuries severe but not immediately terminal. Dr. Thorne accepted these living specimens, paid the agreed-upon rate for a corpse, and then kept them in the hidden sections of the basement until death occurred naturally or was hastened through his interventions. The discovery of this practice was shocking enough, but what Jonathan found in the days that followed was far worse. Given new awareness of what to look for, he began examining the basement more carefully during hours when Thorne was away from the academy. Behind a false wall in the storage room, concealed by shelving units that appeared fixed but could be rolled aside, he discovered an additional chamber perhaps 20 feet square. This room, which appeared in no architectural plans, contained 6 iron-framed beds, each equipped with leather restraints. Medical instruments lined shelves along one wall, their purpose unclear but their sharp edges undeniable. And occupying 3 of the beds were living human beings. According to Jonathan's journal, the 3 were all women, all in various stages of distress. One appeared unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. Another was awake but unresponsive, staring at the ceiling with eyes that suggested either severe shock or deliberate sedation. The third, however, was fully conscious and aware. When Jonathan entered with his lamp, she turned her head toward him and spoke in a whisper. "Please," she said. "Please help me. My name is Eliza. I am not dead. I am not dying. I was sold here, but I am alive." What Eliza told Jonathan that night confirmed his worst suspicions and revealed an even more disturbing reality. She had been a house servant on the Hampton plantation, 12 miles outside Savannah. According to her account, she had been accused of theft by the mistress of the house, a charge she denied but could not disprove. As punishment, the plantation owner had told her she would be sold to the medical academy as a specimen for dissection, a threat Eliza had assumed was meant merely to frighten her. But 3 days prior, she had been loaded onto a wagon in the middle of the night, transported to the academy, and delivered to Dr. Thorne with documents stating she had died of fever. She was not the first, she told Jonathan. Others had been brought to the hidden chamber over the months she had been there. Some were genuinely dying when they arrived and passed within hours or days. But others were like her, sold to the academy by plantation owners who found it more profitable to receive payment for a dead body than to maintain a servant they considered troublesome or economically unproductive. Dr. Thorne kept them in the hidden chamber, sometimes for weeks, conducting what he termed experimental procedures to advance surgical knowledge. Those who survived his interventions eventually died from infection, shock, or deliberate administration of substances that ended their suffering. The horror of this revelation paralyzed Jonathan for 2 days. His journal entries from August 14th and 15th document his internal crisis, his disbelief that such atrocities could be occurring beneath the facade of respectable medical education, his terror at the consequences of exposing his mentor, and his growing realization that he had been complicit through his silence and assistance. "I have held instruments while he operated on bodies I believed were dead," he wrote. "I have taken notes on procedures I thought were being performed on cadavres. How many of those bodies had hearts still beating? How many times did I fail to see what was before me because I chose not to look?" By August 16th, Jonathan had made his decision. He could not go to authorities. Dr. Thorne's position within Savannah's medical community was too secure, his connections too extensive. Any accusation Jonathan made would be dismissed as the delusions of an overwrought student, and Eliza's testimony would be inadmissible in court, her word as an enslaved person legally worthless against a white physician. Instead, Jonathan began planning something more audacious. Not just Eliza's escape, but his own disappearance in a manner that would prevent anyone from searching for him. The plan required access to a body, ironically the one resource abundantly available at the academy. On the evening of August 18th, a legitimate cadaver arrived at the academy, a white man approximately Jonathan's age and build who had died of fever at the city hospital. According to Jonathan's journal, he substituted this body for his own in a manner he described as grimly fitting given the circumstances. He dressed the corpse in his own clothing, planted his personal effects in the pockets, and arranged it in the dissection theater in a position suggesting he had suffered a sudden medical crisis while working late. The actual escape occurred on the night of August 19th. Jonathan had smuggled civilian clothes into the basement and hidden them near the concealed chamber. Under cover of darkness, while Dr. Thorne was attending a medical society dinner across the city, Jonathan freed Eliza from her restraints, helped her dress in the clothes he had brought, and led her out through a basement window that opened onto a narrow alley. They made their way on foot to the Savannah docks, where Jonathan had arranged passage on a merchant vessel bound for Philadelphia using money he had withdrawn from his account days earlier. The ship's manifest, later discovered by researchers examining maritime records at the Philadelphia Historical Society, lists A.J. Freeman and E. Freeman as passengers, described as brother and sister traveling north on family business. What Jonathan left behind was chaos. The discovery of his apparent death the following morning caused immediate alarm at the academy. Dr. Thorne, according to a letter he wrote to William Pierce informing him of his son's tragic demise, theorized that Jonathan had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage brought on by overwork and nervous exhaustion. The letter, preserved in the Pierce family papers at the Augusta Historical Society, expressed profound sorrow and praised Jonathan's dedication to medical science. A brief death notice appeared in the Savannah Republican on August 21, noting the loss of a promising young physician and announcing funeral arrangements. But within days of Jonathan's supposed death, Dr. Thorne began receiving disturbing reports. The night watchman mentioned seeing a young man matching Jonathan's description near the docks on August 19. A clerk at a bank reported that Jonathan had withdrawn a substantial sum on August 17. Most troubling was a brief note that arrived at the academy on August 23, postmarked from Charleston. It contained only a single sentence, written in what appeared to be Jonathan's hand: "The dead sometimes walk, Doctor. Consider your ledgers carefully." Whether Dr. Thorne understood the note's implications is unclear, but his behavior changed markedly after its arrival. According to academy records, he abruptly suspended anatomical demonstrations for the remainder of the term, citing personal reasons. Former students later reported that the quality and quantity of specimens available for study declined dramatically after September 1848. And in December of that year, Dr. Thorne resigned his position at the academy, stating his intention to relocate to Mobile, Alabama, to establish a private surgical practice. For more than a century, the true story of what happened at the Savannah Medical Academy in the summer of 1848 remained hidden. The academy itself closed in 1861 at the outbreak of the Civil War, its building repurposed for military use. After the war, it housed various commercial enterprises before being condemned as structurally unsound in 1965. When demolition began in 1967, workers discovered something that forced a reckoning with the building's history. Behind the basement wall, exactly where Jonathan Pierce's journal would later describe it, they found the hidden chamber. And within that chamber, they found 12 skeletons. Forensic examination by anthropologists from the University of Georgia, documented in a report published in 1968, revealed evidence of trauma that could only have occurred while the victims were alive. Surgical incisions showed patterns inconsistent with normal anatomical dissection. Several skeletons bore signs of amputations performed without medical necessity. Bone trauma indicated procedures conducted without anesthesia. The remains were all African American, all adult, with ages ranging from late teens to early 40s. The discovery prompted an investigation into the Academy's records, though many had been lost over the intervening decades. What survived included portions of Dr. Thorne's acquisition ledgers, revealing a pattern of payments to plantation owners throughout Chatham, Effingham, and Bryan counties. The amounts were significantly higher than standard compensation for deceased bodies, suggesting that plantation owners knew they were selling something more valuable than mere corpses. Most significant was the discovery of Jonathan Pierce's journal in 1969, found sealed in a metal box within a hollow section of wall during the final demolition of the building. The journal had been hidden there, presumably by Jonathan before his escape, as insurance that the truth would eventually emerge. Its pages provided the detailed testimony that confirmed what the forensic evidence suggested, that the Savannah Medical Academy had served not just as a training institution, but as a disposal site for enslaved people deemed uneconomical or troublesome by their owners, and that Dr. Ambrose Thorne had conducted experimental surgery on living subjects under the guise of anatomical education. The revelation caused brief controversy in 1969, though many details were suppressed by both the medical community and descendants of families implicated in the scandal. The 12 bodies were eventually interred in a mass grave at Laurel Grove Cemetery with a simple marker noting unnamed victims of medical experimentation. No charges were ever filed, all potential defendants having died decades earlier. But the journal provided one additional revelation that transformed the story from one of pure horror to something more complex. Jonathan Pierce had not only escaped, he had built a life in the aftermath of his actions. Census records from Philadelphia show a Jonathan Freeman, physician, residing at the same address as Eliza Freeman, seamstress, from 1850 through 1880. City directories confirm their presence year after year, living openly if modestly in a community that asked few questions about origins. In 2019, genealogical researchers investigating medical education in the Antebellum South located cemetery records from Toronto, where the couple had moved in their later years following the death of several family members. Jonathan Freeman died in 1891 at age 67. Eliza Freeman died in 1893 at approximately 70. They were buried side by side in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, their shared headstone reading simply Freeman family, together in life and death. A photograph of the headstone, included in a 2020 academic paper on medical ethics in the 19th century, shows flowers recently placed at the grave. The paper's author noted speaking with a great-great-granddaughter of Jonathan and Eliza who confirmed family oral history, that her ancestors had fled Georgia under dramatic circumstances, that Jonathan had been a medical student who had sacrificed his career and identity to save a woman from certain death, and that they had spent 50 years together raising a family and contributing to their community while never speaking publicly of their past. The building that once housed the Savannah Medical Academy no longer exists. Its site on Reynolds Square is now occupied by a parking structure. No historical marker acknowledges what occurred there, though the 1968 anthropological report remains in university archives, accessible to researchers willing to search for it. The story surfaces occasionally in academic papers on medical ethics or the exploitation of enslaved bodies in medical education, but remains largely unknown outside specialist circles. Yet those who live near the old Reynolds Square location report phenomena that have persisted for decades. On certain nights, particularly in August, neighbors claim to hear sounds emanating from the parking structure's lower level. Not the expected noises of cars or ventilation systems, but something older and more disturbing. The metallic sound of instruments being sharpened against stone. Breathing, labored and desperate. And occasionally, words in a mixture of English and Gullah, too faint to distinguish but carrying a tone of pleading that raises hair on the back of the neck. Security footage from the parking structure, reviewed after multiple reports, shows nothing unusual. Acoustic engineers brought in to investigate found no structural explanation for the sounds. Yet they persist, heard by night security guards, late-night visitors, and residents of nearby buildings. Those who have heard them describe not fear exactly, but profound unease, as if bearing witness to suffering that refuses to be silenced even by time. The story of Dr. Ambrose Thorne's basement classroom reminds us that the boundaries between medicine and atrocity, between education and exploitation, have not always been as clear as we would like to believe. It speaks to the calculated cruelty that flourished beneath the facade of scientific progress when certain lives were deemed less than human. And it preserves the memory of Jonathan Pierce's choice, the decision of one young man who, confronted with unspeakable evil, chose conscience over career, humanity over convenience, and spent the rest of his life living under an assumed name to protect the woman he saved. In the quiet corners of Savannah, where Spanish moss still drapes from ancient oaks and the elegant squares maintain their antebellum geometry, the past never quite releases its hold. And on certain August nights, when the air is heavy with humidity and approaching storms, those who listen carefully might hear it still. The whisper of suffering that demanded to be witnessed, the echo of a choice made in darkness, and the persistent testimony of bodies that were meant to be forgotten but refused to remain silent.